Alright, so it's been a bit since Arknights Endfield released, and as such, I think now is a pretty good time to take a look at all the characters and how they've been performing in the game so far. There are a lot of characters to choose from when you play Endfield, and as such, a ton of different team compositions that you can mess around with. But the main thing I've noticed with Endfield so far is that it's actually pretty difficult to just say that this character is better than this other character, because at least in my experience, there's a decent amount of nuance to each kit. As a result of that, what I wanted to do today was not necessarily create a tier list of characters that says something like Chen is an A tier DPS and Enmin is an S tier DPS because she, deals more damage or something, but more so go into that nuance that I mentioned just a bit ago. Since there are a lot of characters in the game right now, today I'm only going to focus on the 4 and 5 star characters, but in the future I'll come back and do the 6 stars too. So what I'm going to do is break down each character's kit and then explain it a little bit, and then also give them a number out of 10 for a few different categories. For one, I do think it's actually worth giving a rating for damage despite this not being a generic tier list, so that'll definitely be one category. The next will be utility, which is going to be more focused on what each character can do apart from damage. I'll also be ranking how versatile each character is, meaning how many different scenarios you can use them in. And lastly, I'll be rating how well I think each of the characters will scale long term, or in other words, their longevity. So let's get started, but before that, I do have to mention that this video is sponsored by Arknights Endfield, so thanks a bunch to them for that. I think what I'm going to do is start alphabetically, so let's go with Akekuri. Akekuri is a 4-star Vanguard whose primary role is to generate SP through her combo, but she also can offer a lot more stuff through her ultimate too. For one, her ult generates even more SP, but it also offers a damage boost to one character and also an attack boost to the team. With all that said, I think it is pretty safe to say that she offers quite a lot, especially so as a 4-star. Being a 4-star gives her easy access to all of her potentials, and that further buffs both her, but also the team. But despite this health buff, both her role and also the fact that, she's a 4-star, pretty much locks her out of actually being the damage dealer in teams, and you'll probably end up being a little bit disappointed if you try using her as one. Overall, with how much her kit is catered around the team rather than herself, her damage score is definitely pretty low, so I would put that down at something like a 3. On the other hand, because of what she offers the teams that she's played in, particularly SP as sources that are fairly uncommon, as well as the buffs, well, it's kind of difficult to rate her utility as anything lower than, honestly, a solid 9. Furthermore, because of how useful SP is, it also means that she's very, very much playable in a variety of teams, not just the on-banner character with Levitain, for example. If you add on top of that the fact that her skill is essentially a free elemental application, and also the fact that her combo skill literally just requires you to hit the enemy, it is pretty easy to slot her into a lot of different teams. Like, you really wouldn't expect a fire character to be played with Yvonne, for example, but if you really wanted to, you could, and you would get some pretty decent benefits from it. As a result of that, that pretty easily lands her versatility up at a similar level to her utility, but I would say maybe a little bit less than that, so we'll give it a solid 8. Lastly, in terms of longevity, I think that based on the buff she provides, as well as the fact that she's got both good and easy to access SP generation, she'll be playable in a lot of different teams for quite a while, and I think I'll put that up on an 8 too. Now, granted, if a 5 or 6 star support releases soon, sure, her value will definitely diminish, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing to basically have, 2 Akekuris. I'm pretty impressed that this is the kit of a character that is the lowest rarity in the game and also completely free, but hey, I'm certainly not complaining. All in all, despite her lack of damage, she is a great character that's usable in a lot of different scenarios. Next, we can move on to Alesh. Alesh is a Vanguard similar to Akekuri, so that means he can generate SP, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's very good outside of that point. For the most part, what he specializes in is teams centered around solidification, because most of his kit involves that reaction in some way, whether that's by forcibly applying it via his skill, or the cryo-infliction that he can apply by using his ult. But despite being able to apply those elements, what he really lacks is any kind of buffs for the reaction, which does put him in a bit of an awkward position when you compare him to other characters that do provide more than just, the element. Technically, you can actually get him to buff characters, but that's only on his 4th potential, and even then, it is literally RNG whether you actually get the buff or not, because, I guess we love gacha inside of our gacha.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it. Aw, dang it.
Alongside that, due to his role once again being a Vanguard, his damage isn't anything super crazy either, which means he's not left with a whole lot in terms of, actually dealing damage. And as a result, for his damage, I would definitely rate him on the lower end. He can actually do okay damage with some of his abilities, definitely more than Akekuri at least, so as a result of that, I would probably put his rating down something like a 5, which is better than Akekuri, but still nothing crazy. For his utility, like I said, while he can apply a reaction and he can also generate SP, that's basically all he does. He has definitely got one of the more simple kits in the game, so that kind of leaves me with no other choice than putting that down at a 5 too. And honestly, in terms of versatility, he's basically got none due to how hard locked he is with solidification. So while sure, he can be played with Yvonne or Last Rite if you want, he is definitely not a great unit anywhere else, and other more versatile options like Akekuri would definitely be better in most of the situations that you might want to play him. As such, his versatility score is honestly probably going to be one of the lowest we see at a 1. And for longevity, honestly, I think I need to rate that one pretty low too, because if he's not really wanted by most of the cryo units right now, then I kinda doubt he will be in the future either. There are simply just better options at this point in the game, so I think I'll put that down at a 3. All in all, I honestly feel like Alesh got a pretty gimped kit where he was kinda intended to excel at one thing, being, solidification, but he fails to apply necessary buffs, team utility, or even damage to actually do so. Now, onto one of my more favorite characters in the game, Antal. Antal is a fully supportive character generally focused around both heat and electric teams. Not only can he buff the damage of both of those elements for your team, he can also debuff the enemy for both of those damage types. And if you know anything about damage formulas in gacha games, those two things are usually multiplicative of each other, meaning that the damage boosts that he offers are pretty damn impactful. Now, that being said, the damage buff part of his kit is only through his ultimate rather than his skill, which applies the debuff, so that does make it a little bit annoying to have consistent uptime on. Despite that though, he is definitely a very potent character. Now, with that said, because of how impactful his buffs are, and especially so because he's a 4-star, his kit does have to suffer somewhere, and that is definitely in the damage department. I mean, come on, his ult literally doesn't deal any damage itself, it just has the damage buff for the team. So, as a result of that, and also just his multipliers not being super amazing, I have to rate his damage definitely more on the middling side, probably around a 2 or so. On the other hand, as I've been talking about, his supportive capabilities are actually pretty nuts, assuming you're running him in electric or heat teams, which at least in my eyes brings his utility up to around a 7 or so. I would honestly rate him higher there, but he's in competition with Akekuri for fire teams, who's a great unit there, as well as Ardelia and Perlica for electric teams, so it is a little bit rough there too. For versatility, honestly, he's never really going to get much value outside of those 2 element teams, so his versatility will definitely have to be ranked lower at around a 5. But that said, while he is in competition with those aforementioned units, just like I mentioned earlier with having 2 Akekuris being a good thing, having the ability to use Antal in one team and then Akekuri, Ardelia, or Perlica in another isn't really a bad thing at all, assuming we eventually get multi-team content. So for longevity, I have a feeling that he'll be fine for quite a while, assuming we don't get spammed with supports for both the heat and electric archetypes, so I think I'll put him at a 7 there as well. And now we can move on to one of the last 2 vanguards, so let's talk about Arclight. Arclight is a support for the electric team right now, and just like the others, her main role in that team is generating SP. She does also boost electric damage, and on top of that, she can apply the electric element fairly frequently, which does let you get an electrification debuff to boost the team's overall damage. And despite being a support, honestly I found myself pleasantly surprised with her damage to the point that she feels more like a sub DPS than anything, which honestly makes sense considering the electric team already has a main support with Antal and a main DPS with Avywenna. So as a result of that, I would say her damage score would end up roughly around a 5. It's not super great, but it is definitely serviceable. Utility wise, like I said, she is a great support for the electric team, both by debuffing the enemies so that they take more damage, as well as the SP generated through consuming those electric stacks. So I'd say for the electric team, she definitely has a lot of utility, landing her at around an 8 there, but I don't think she's really got a whole lot going for her outside of that. Now granted, electrification is usable by more than just electric teams, and we'll come back to that when we get to Perlica, but she is definitely not designed for other teams, which means her versatility is pretty low as a result, so I would put that as a 3. Longevity wise, I honestly really don't know if she'll have consistent long-term value as we move forward and get more units into the game. Like sure, she does deal okay damage, but I'm sure that a 6-star in the future will deal more. And sure, she does generate SP and apply electrification, but we already have better applicators in the game right now, let alone what might come down the line. So as a result, I feel that I can really only put her longevity score at a 6 at most, meaning she's really good for now, but in my opinion down the line, she will definitely be very replaceable. Next, we can move on to Arclight's partner in crime, Avywenna. While the previous electric units that I've talked about in this video either do basically no damage with Antal or deal just enough to be considered a sub DPS like Arclight, Avywenna is basically where it all comes together because she is definitely intended to be the main damage dealer for electric teams right now. Like in her entire kit, including dupes all the way to P5, literally the only buff or debuff that's applied by her specifically is a very small electric damage increase via her ultimate. Other than that, it is all damage. And to be clear, that is not a bad thing. She's got pretty strong single target, but alongside that, both her combo skill and ult throw spears onto the ground, and she can summon those spears back to her position to pierce through enemies after using a regular skill. And as a result of doing that piercing attack, you can also use her in AoE content too. So honestly, at least in my experience, while she doesn't deal as much damage as, Levitain or something like that, she deals more than a respectable damage that easily puts her in the upper echelons of damage dealers right now. I would say if Levitain is a 10 out of 10, then Avywenna easily sits down at a 7, if not an 8, which at least in my eyes is pretty solid. Utility wise though, on the other hand, yeah, she basically has none. The only thing that you could remotely consider utility is the tiny debuff that her ult provides, and I guess the little bit of AoE damage that I mentioned earlier, but realistically her role is to be a damage dealer, and that's basically it. So as a result, I'm putting her utility down very low at just a 1, and in that same vein, when your only role is to deal damage, then as a result that also means your versatility will suffer too, so that'll be the same at a 1 as well. To be clear though, just because those scores are low doesn't make her a bad unit, nor anyone else that I'll talk about today. They all just have different specializations, and the whole point of the video is to discuss what those specializations are. And lastly, on top of all of that, longevity wise, I honestly do think this might be her weakest point for right now. With the way gachas work nowadays, the lower rarities will usually end up being outclassed eventually, and because Avywenna is already a solid enough damage dealer right now, that means that whenever a 6-star DPS is released in the future, they will probably have to deal even more damage than she does, which will bump Avywenna down on the damage charts. But with that said, I do have some faith that the Arknights devs can keep the balance fairly solid, because for the most part they did a good job in the original game. And as a result of all that, I'm going to put her right there in the middle at a 5 for longevity, because at the end of the day it really does depend on what happens with future character releases. Now we can move on to another 4-star and arguably one of the more weak characters in the entire game. Unlike the majority of the rest of his squad, Catcher largely falls behind for a variety of reasons. But first, to quickly explain what he does, he is a 4-star defender whose main role is to shield your team, as well as offer defensive utility through a parry. He can also generate some SP through that parry, but for the most part his role is to just be defensive. And, as a more defensive unit, unfortunately that inherently means that his damage falls behind, and even worse, as a 4-star unit it falls off even more. It definitely doesn't help that on top of all of that, we got Snowshine for free, who basically fulfills his role, but, better, both as a damage dealer and as a defensive unit. I would say damage wise he is definitely on the very low end, honestly probably around a 3 if not a 2. Utility wise though, like I said, he does offer some SP generations and shields, but as I mentioned just a bit ago, we got Snowshine for free, so his utility definitely doesn't do a whole lot in comparison. As a result of that, I would definitely put his utility down at a 4 because it is usable, just, there's better options. And lastly, for versatility, honestly, this is actually the one area where I can't really fault the guy. Every character in the game and every team in the game actually can use shields, and it never really hurts to have a defensive parry either. It's just that other characters do what he does, but again, I have to repeat this, better. All in all, due to him being universally usable, I would put his versatility as a 6, though honestly, let's be real, most people will never use him. And lastly, in terms of longevity, well, yeah.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Next, we can go on to one of the starting crew with Chen, and honestly, despite me liking Chen, I mean, how couldn't you? Her kit itself isn't actually all that special. Basically, her kit entirely revolves around the lift debuff that physical teams can apply, which can crowd control some enemies, and at the very least quickly apply stagger to others. Which on paper is really nice, but it comes with a caveat that it pretty much entirely locks her to those teams. I guess you could technically throw into any team just to apply the crowd control and the stagger that the lift debuff applies, but I wouldn't say that it's useful overall outside of the physical teams. Damage wise though, she's actually fairly solid. I would definitely say she does more than Arclight, but I would also say she does less than actual physical carries, so she's still pretty solidly in the sub DPS archetype, albeit a pretty decent one. That said, there's definitely a lot of room for the sub DPS archetype to be better than what the current options offer, so for now I would say she's probably around a 6 or maybe a 7. Utility wise, as someone that can very easily apply lift up, I mean all she has to do is tap her skill, she does have some inherent utility because of the control that it offers. Like, have you ever seen those shield guys? Well, they're actually pretty easily taken care of with that debuff because of how quickly she can break their stagger bars, and as a result she can be pretty useful in those scenarios. Apart from that though, pretty much all she does is damage, and as such I have to rate her utility fairly low at around a 3. Versatility wise, I unfortunately think she's in a pretty similar boat to Catcher here, where a lot of teams can use her in them, but she definitely doesn't excel in most of them apart from the physical ones. And as a result of that, I would also put her versatility score on the same level as Catcher's, where it's a 6. She is usable in a lot of places, she's not the best in a lot of places. And lastly, longevity-wise, she is definitely in a similar boat to Arclight in this case, where once we get better sub-DPS characters, I can definitely see their usability fall off, though honestly I consider Chen a bit worse in her niche than Arclight, so I'll give her a 5 instead of a 6. And on to another, one of my favorite characters, Dapan. I don't really know how else to put this, but he deals damage. And honestly, that's pretty much it. His skill, it deals damage. His combo skill also deals damage. His ult, you might not get it at this point, but to no one's surprise, it deals damage. He can actually apply all of the physical debuffs with lift, vulnerability, and knockdown, but all of those are really only there to amplify the damage he does and, backload it. And unlike Chen, who's kind of an on-the-side character, he's really your front and center guy that's up in the enemy's face, whacking them with his, pan. Damage-wise, he is pretty simple. You hit the enemy, it applies debuffs, and then you just keep hitting them until they're dead. And it is pretty decent damage too, especially due to how easy it is to stagger enemies with him due to all those aforementioned physical debuffs. Honestly, I would actually say he outputs similar damage to Avywenna, though it is genuinely a lot easier to do and without much nuance to it. So I would definitely put him at a 7 alongside her. Utility-wise though, his major role apart from damage is just the stagger that all those debuffs apply, which don't get me wrong is nice, but all in all isn't that big of a deal and is definitely not his major role. Similar to Chen, I would put his utility down at a 3 as well. Versatility wise, yeah, this is definitely one of his pain points. He's a physical DPS and as such basically requires physical teams to function and also build up the various stacks of debuffs that he benefits from. You can't really use him as a sub DPS, nor is he really great as a support, so honestly I would put him down at a 1 here. And longevity wise, he is also in the exact same spot as Avywenna, where once we get a true 6-star main physical DPS, his value will definitely fall. Though when that happens is definitely up in the air, and as such he'll land right in the middle at a 5 for now. Moving on from Dapan, we can now talk about my favorite 4-star character, which is Estella. Honestly, she is a really weird character. Like, despite the fact that she's cryo and also applies cryo through, her generic basic skill, the entire rest of her kit is actually designed around supporting physical teams. Like, both her combo skill and her ult apply physical susceptibility, and most of her passives and potentials work towards improving the capabilities of that or working based off of that. For example, she does actually have SP generation in her kit, but you can only access that SP generation after triggering Shatter, which again is physical based. So as a result, from my experience playing her, it kind of leads to a weird scenario where some teams can benefit from her, but not all that many do, and because her damage is split between 2 different types being cryo and physical, that hurts it too. And speaking of damage, both due to what I just mentioned now, but also just, being a 4-star support, she is definitely on the lower end in terms of damage. She does get saved a little bit by her ult because it has a pretty sizable AoE, and that does help boost her capabilities, but even so, I'm still putting her down at a 4. Utility-wise, she is actually pretty decent despite the split nature of her kit. Personally, I found decent success running her in dual element teams, which honestly I feel is kind of rare because most characters want mono element teams right now. If I can get similar clear times right now with a dual element team including Estella, compared to, using a mono element team, then honestly I consider that pretty decent, and her role as someone that can apply both physical susceptibility and also shatter certainly helps. As such, I'll rate her utility at a solid 7. Versatility wise, she is definitely kind of locked to the above elements, though I guess if you really want to, you could use her as a basic elemental applier for other reactions. That said, it's nothing crazy, so I'll put her versatility score down at a 4. And longevity wise, I think that her kit is too, niche I guess. So despite the use cases that it does have, I don't necessarily know if people will be using her long term as accounts develop to get other physical units or better units to quickly apply cryo. And as such, I think her score for that will be down at a 4. And now onto the last 4-star in the game, Fluorite. Unlike pretty much every character that I've ranked so far, Fluorite is actually deserving of a 5th category, and that's just how hot she is. Yup, 10 out of 10. Alright, moving on. Anyway, Fluorite's kit generally revolves around applying more stacks of either the nature or cryo affliction, but she doesn't really do a whole lot else. She is basically one of the few characters in the entire game that I would consider to be fully in the role of a debuffer, but she definitely doesn't do enough of it to be super worth using. Like, if you look at her damage, it is honestly kind of pitiful, even more so because she's a 4-star, so that puts her damage definitely at around a 2 or so. And sure, her utility is nice for cryo and nature teams, particularly Last Right now because she can help Last Right get her combo activations skill quicker, but it generally ends up that it's actually just better to buff the damage through another character like Perlica, rather than rely on quicker cycling and stacking from Fluorite. As a result of that, her utility definitely gets outscaled, so I'd rate that around a 4. It is useful and it can lead to fun scenarios where you get to attack more frequently, but it is definitely not the best. Versatility wise, yeah, she's basically only used in 2-element teams, and even then only for the variations of those teams that want stacking inflictions. So really, I can't rate her that high here, even more so because she gets outscaled by another free unit with Perlica. So she is definitely getting a 4-star there too. And longevity wise, again, I don't think I really need to mention it here, but she has already been outscaled in the first patch, so yeah, I really don't think she's gonna have a place in many teams going forward, so that'll be a 1. At least she's hot though. And since I've been talking about Perlica a lot before this, it's probably a good time to talk about her specifically right now. Perlica is a mix of a sub DPS and support, and honestly, I have to say she's one of the better characters in the entire game. I guess she stole enough money from the player base that she was able to buy a good kit, or, you know, something like that. In short, she both deals respectable damage as a sub DPS, arguably on a similar level to Chen, but on top of that, she can very easily apply electrification via her combo skill, which boosts the team's overall damage rather than just her personal damage. So as a result, I feel like her damage numbers are actually pretty decent, so again, similar to Chen, she solidly lands around a 6 or a 7. Utility wise is where she pulls away from Chen due to how easy it is to apply her electrification debuff and also the amount of damage amp that it provides. Alongside that, she doesn't just have the electrification debuff, but is also a great starting point for reactions, as all you have to do is use her skill, and that applies a basic infliction on the enemy, which in my eyes pushes her utility up to an 8. And on that note, because she can apply a debuff that literally every team in the game wants, you know, with electrification, and it is very easy to get a basic infliction application as well, her versatility scores very high as well at a solid 9. She is usable in basically every team in the game as long as you set up your combo rotation properly, so in my eyes that sets her up to be one of the better characters across the game as a whole. And on that note, longevity wise, I really do think she'll last for quite a while, so her longevity will also land her at an 8. Genuinely, I think she is competitive with the 6-star girl Berta, which is kind of wild to say considering she was given completely for free at the start of the game. So basically, the only thing that can really replace her is going to be someone that does what she does, but with either more buffs or more damage, so, you know, we'll just have to see what happens. Now we can move on to Snowshine, who's kind of like a premium version of Catcher from earlier. She basically does the exact same thing he does, meaning she's got a parry, but she also has a few bonuses on top of that. For one, her way of sustaining the team is a little bit different. Instead of shielding like Catcher, she actually offers healing, and at least personally, I find that to be a lot more valuable. Like over time, you're going to end up living a lot longer if you can infinitely heal up rather than just negating damage with shields and then potentially taking chip damage underneath of it. On top of that, her ultimate actually applies a pretty useful debuff, which is solidification, making her a pretty good unit in terms of CC, and on top of that, her parry applies cryo infliction to the enemy, which is a great thing to add on top of the solidification that her ult provides. As a sustain type character, that does mean her damage isn't anything great, but I will have to say that when you have her ult, and when you do land her parry, they can actually do respectable enough damage, so I'd probably put her around a 4 or 5 in that category. Utility wise, she is easily one of the better units in the game. She has heals, defensive utility through her parry, actual elemental application, I mean, what's not to like? And now granted, the quote unquote meta right now is to just kill things before they kill you, so while it's not super valuable, she is definitely a very comfy character and can easily help carry you through all of the content that the game has. Personally, I would rate her utility at a solid 7 because she does really have a lot to offer, even if it's not necessarily, you know, necessary. And to wrap up, for versatility, I think she's usable in basically any team despite favoring cryo teams with a solidification, because at the end of the day, she's a sustain and most teams do end up enjoying that. So I would rate her versatility at a 7 as well. Longevity wise, honestly, I kind of consider her to be in a little bit of an awkward spot, because like I mentioned, right now the meta is just to kill the enemy quickly. But in a world where sustain is actually required, I can see her value pretty much skyrocketing. So as a result of that, really, all I can say is her versatility depends, and we'll just have to see what happens and leave it as a question mark for now. On to the last starting member, we've got Wulfgard. He's honestly a really interesting character, where he's one of the few characters in the game that can be played as both a main or a sub DPS. But as a result of that, I personally feel like he doesn't end up excelling in either of those roles. In my opinion, his better role is actually to be a sub DPS, and he's pretty decent in budget teams with lower rated units, but his main role right now at least is to be a sub DPS in Levitin teams. Damage-wise, I think he's just okay. Like, honestly, I don't really think his damage is all that great, especially compared to a great sub-DPS like Perlica or even Chen. And in my opinion, his level of a sub-DPS is honestly more comparable to Arclight, but maybe a little bit better, which is okay, but, you know, just not amazing. As a result of that, I would probably rate his damage at around a 6. Utility-wise, he's actually a rare case where I'd say he almost has like negative utility, because he can actually steal elemental inflictions from your actual DPS if you use his skills in the wrong time. That said, assuming you do time everything properly, it can be okay, but it definitely adds a level of annoyance to an otherwise decent character. But regardless, I would rate his utility pretty low at around a 4. At the end of the day, he's pretty much just a damage dealer until you get his P3, and even then he only offers a small amount of heat damage bonus to the team, so it's really not anything crazy. Versatility wise, I would say he's alright. While he doesn't excel in most teams, he is almost always a fairly comfortable slot in as a generic sub DPS. So I would say his versatility there would be around a 7 or an 8. And lastly, for longevity, I really don't think he's going to last all that long, and even currently, if you really wanted to, you could replace him in his quote-unquote best team with Levitain with other units. So honestly, I think I would really put him down at a 4 or so for longevity. The second we get a really good pyro sub DPS, or honestly even an average sub DPS, I think he probably will end up being replaced in most of his teams. And finally, the last 5-star to bring the video to a close, we've got Xaihe. Xaihe is a great unit for cryo teams, offering healing, damage buffs, and cryo infliction, but she can actually amp all arts damage as well. So honestly, she's fairly usable in a lot of different teams. Now with that said, damage-wise on the other hand, yeah, I mean she's a healer, so definitely don't expect a lot here. Out of everyone else in the game, I really don't know if there's anyone else that deserves a 1 here more than her, because it is definitely not her intended role. Utility-wise though, she absolutely excels here through all the buffs and stuff that I mentioned earlier. She has a double stack of cryo and arts infliction, healing whichever one likes, and also decent elemental application, so she really does offer a lot here. No one else in the game really offers the same raw damage amp that she provides for cryo teams, considering hers is upwards of 50%, and it's really just beneficial overall to a lot of different teams. So as a result of that, she easily lands at a 9 here for utility. Versatility on the other hand, she is definitely weaker in this category because there are a lot of other versatile characters here, so even though she can buff and heal everyone, like I keep saying, she definitely favors cryo teams rather than, you know, the majority of other teams, and as a result, her rating here can only really be a 6. Because again, while she is generically useful, her specialty is by and large the place that you want to play her, and again, that is in cryo teams. And lastly, for longevity, I would honestly say that she is one of the few 4 to 5-star characters that will have a place in the game for a very, very long time in my opinion, albeit specifically for cryo-based teams. Personally, I think the fact that she consolidates multiple roles into one is extremely valuable, and I don't see anyone taking that from her for quite a while, even if they're a 6-star unit. So I think she is probably one of the best characters to invest in, assuming you know, have a cryo team, and I think she will be very useful in those teams for a very long time, so as such she gets a solid 9 out of 10 there, with 1 point docked due to the cryo-specific nature of her kit. And that's everyone. For those of you that listened and made it this far, I do appreciate it, and please feel free to let me know your thoughts on all these characters yourself down in the comments below. If you want some more content like this, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll have more coming soon, and I'll also be sure to cover the 6 stars too.